All right, guys. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Moss, who's a psychiatry resident. She has a very wonderful story, as a unique story for her struggles throughout medical school. And Dr. Moss, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast and YouTube page. My name is Stephanie Moss, like you said, PGY1, about to be PGY2, psychiatry resident in North Chicago, Rosalind Franklin University. I went to medical school at Rush Medical School
Wow.
in Chicago. I actually went to medical school with my husband. We came into medical school together, so we um, matched into medical school together from our undergrad. He is now a PGY2, almost a PGY3 in neurology. He stayed at Rush, and I am very into wellness, very into mental health, very into trauma-informed care, and I love sharing my journey and story to help other medical students and pre-meds going through the different, I like to say, hidden curriculum in medicine.
Wow, that's great. And fun fact for those of you guys watching, Dr. Moss took out the time the day before her step three to come here and talk to us and give her advice to you guys. So, big props to her.
Thank you.
Um, so Dr. Moss, tell us a little bit about, you talked about your step one struggles before. Why don't you give us a little story about what that struggle was and how you overcame it?
Oh, yes. Okay. So going to step one is obviously for my school, which is the majority, is between the second and third year of medical school. Interestingly enough, this was the first year of COVID. So
Oh,
already everything had turned to virtual. Our second year of medical school had been all virtual. So trying to already manage that weird virtual school, plus trying to do volunteer work virtually. I had already struggled my second year of medical school, failing a couple exams. And so I had to, right before going into my step one dedicated, I knew that I already had to kind of cut out a little bit of my dedicated time to retake my exams. At that point, it was just one of the exams because I had
oh,
already done it during my like winter holiday break. So
hmm
already coming in, normally you have like 8 weeks of dedicated. I now had 6 weeks of dedicated. Okay,
oh,
going through 6 weeks of dedicated, virtual. It was, and COVID, it was kind of a disaster.
mm,
I was doing tons of practice exams and I just could not pass my practice exams. And looking back, I'm thankful that my school is like, you cannot go in to your step exam if you're not even close to passing. So at that point, they gave me an option, but it was kind of forced. It's like an option forced to take a leave of absence. So
mm,
I took a leave of absence while the rest of my cohort went on to do their third year of medical school. At that point, I was like, no, I can do this.
mhm,
Maybe I'll just do an extra. I was like teetering between taking a leave of absence and they turned my third year of medical school or third clinical into like an elective.
mm,
So I could do an elective. So
sure.
kind of a leave of absence, kind of not at
hmm
that. Finally, I sat down, I finally took it, and I failed. I failed by 1 point. So at that point, it was still graded. And I was obviously so upset. And at that point, the school was like, nope, now you have to take a leave of absence. So I did that. During that point, I had a friend reach out to me and she was like, hey, in the past couple months, you were just diagnosed with some mental health and physical health conditions. Why don't you apply for accommodations? And I ended up applying for accommodations and trying to do at the same time practice exams. Did it again because I was exhausted and I just wanted to get over it.
Yeah.
Failed again.
Oh,
Took time, more time. At that time, I was also working 40 hours a week because we'll talk about this later. There's a
sure,
huge,
sure.
when you're taking a leave of absence, your finances, if you take student loans, are taken away. So now I had to figure out how I was going to make the money that my husband, he's a medical student. I had to figure out how I could make up my student loans. Eventually, I was like, no work or decrease my work amount study, and eventually I was able to pass it and go and start my third year medical school. Long story short.
Wow. Wow. So a lot of hurdles throughout the way.
Oh yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. Before you even start like dedicated for step one and stuff, were you prepping for the exam itself during that school year, or were you just getting through the school year material?
And that's a very good question. Starting with, I would say the summer before second year medical school, I started doing UWorld because that's
Mm,
what they recommended. They're like,
sure.
okay, you have 2 months off. This is the time to start studying
Hmm.
step. So already starting to study, doing UWorld 10, maybe a week,
Sure,
starting to
sure.
get into an idea. During my second year medical school, it became overwhelming. And so what I figured out was like, okay, what if I just do the UWorld regarding the specific block I'm in? So we were in cardiology. Let me just do all the cardiology UWorld. Now, this was, in theory, a good idea because I'm practicing for STEP, getting an idea of what the questions are,
Yeah.
and studying for my clinical.
Hmm.
Good to a point,
Hmm.
especially because my school was very different than the U World. They had a lot of curriculum
Hmm.
that was more detailed than what they wanted for STEP. And so that was a detriment to me because then I'm learning stuff that I don't need to learn
Yeah.
for the medical school exam. So it's a really
Hmm.
hard balance to try to figure out how much am I preparing for step one versus how much am I preparing for my block exams. Now,
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
worked.
Uh-huh.
80% of the time, I still failed two of my courses,
Hmm.
but all the other courses I passed. So
Hmm.
it's hard.
Hmm.
But I would
Okay.
say very school dependent on what their
Mm.
course is. I've met with medical students that they do NBMEs for their
Yeah.
practice exams for their school.
Yeah.
If that was the case, oh yeah, do you world.
Hmm.
That's not always the case.
That's true. Yeah. My school, I was luckily I had NBME exams myself, so I
Wow.
was preparing for boards the whole time through with that.
So
Okay.
lucky.
Yeah, I know. I don't like how there's so much differences in every med school. It should be a little more unified in how everyone does it, so everyone knows
Wow,
what to
it is
do.
a challenge.
But kind of going off of that, so you had that 6 weeks. We talked about that dedicated you had in your first attempt. During that 6 weeks, what did you do, and what were your test scores like, if you don't mind sharing those?
Yeah, of course. And what I should have done before is pulled up my blog post. So I've written a blog post specifically going through every single practice test that I did.
Okay.
And I also did on a podcast post similar thing. So let me just pull that up.
Sure, sure. Take your time.
Here it is. Lessons
Mm-hmm.
learned from failing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the very first time that I was in my dedicated experience, I I I focused on relearning the material because I didn't feel that I knew all the material. When I did those practice exams, I was scoring pretty low. Let me see. Let me go to the actual scores. Okay. Whew. January, so not even dedicated yet. Very first, I'm in the middle of my second year block, and
Sure.
obviously I haven't even learned all the
Yeah.
material. I guess scored a 155. The
Okay.
first, let me look at what dedicated looked like. Okay, so dedicated time, probably around end of March, I scored 161. And at that point, the passing score was a 194.
Hmm.
So I'm about, what is it, 20, 25 points off. So at that point, I was like, okay, it must be the content.
Yeah.
We just talked about, oh, we hadn't gone through all the content specifically for the exam. So I started going through each and every day I focused on tutor mode,
Hmm.
going through each individual block. So one day I spent all day going through cardiology. Next, I spent all day doing reproductive. Next day, doing all pulmonology. That would have been amazing if I had months on end
Mm,
of practice. We're talking about weeks here. And
mm,
so, two things I did wrong in that sense. One, I was doing tutor mode, so I couldn't get a lot of them done
mm.
because you're slower.
Yeah.
You're reading the answers, you're understanding the material. Maybe you even get distracted and look it up. So that was my first challenge that and not the best thing that I did.
Hmm.
The second thing was only focusing on one topic at a time. And
Oh,
the reason that's a problem is because the actual exam is mixed up. You will sit down in one block of 40, you might have one question of reproductive.
yeah.
So even though it would have been nice to just do that maybe the first week or maybe, just to get into the hang of questions and
Sure,
hang
sure.
into the topics, looking back, especially a short amount of time in studying, and I tutor medical students all the time. You need to get into this habit of sitting down and doing 40 questions at a time
Yeah.
and tips, because that's how the testing is, especially if you're struggling with how to answer test questions.
Hmm.
That's something you really need to get into. So those
Okay.
are quick little tips
Yeah,
of
no, that's great. That's great.
things.
So you're saying if you did those tips, you think you'd have a better chance at passing on your first attempt?
100%, because by
Okay.
the time I got to the exam, I was not physically able to sit down
Sure.
and do an 8 or 9 hour blocks. So, something that I then recommend students is sitting at a time, even if it maybe at first is not 40 questions at a time, but at least an hour at a time. You need to get the mental and physical
Yeah.
stamina to be brain focus into the test and then a break. And if you look at a lot of people who have ADHD, do that prodrome method. So that's actually exactly how it is in the exam. You
Mm,
focus in, take out,
yeah,
break. Focus in, take a break.
exactly.
So doing the same thing in your practice, dedicate time, is very important. And I did the
Mm,
same thing in step two, and I did the same thing while studying for step three.
perfect. Wow. Okay. So you've been having a learning curve from this. It really
Oh
taught you how
yeah,
to study.
oh yeah.
Okay. A little bit more about that first period. So you did questions. Did you do a certain amount, like 80, 120? How many did you end up doing a day?
See, since I was in tutoring mode, it's possible that I maybe did 40 a day.
40 a day.
Because
Okay.
the usually when you're doing tutor mode, you can estimate that it's about 10 a day. Or sorry,
10
10.
and 10 an
So
hour. Okay.
maybe I spent 4 hours doing
Okay.
it for 40 in the morning, and then in the afternoon I was doing sketchy. I was doing watching Pathoma, watching doing I didn't do Anki, but doing other types of learning and practice.
Sure.
And so that was then another downfall that I had. Those extra 4 hours that I was doing passive learning, I could have added another UWorld 40.
But doing that sketchy and my sketchy farm, sketchy micro, do you think that was helpful for you, or were you not able to review that material? What do you think was the problem there for you?
I think the biggest thing is it becoming too passive
Hmm.
and wasting time where my mind was still active and able to do questions. When I went back and did it my second and ended up passing, or my step two and even step three,
Hmm.
I figured out, okay, where am I mentally exhausted but still able to absorb information? For
Sure.
me, it was at night. So after dinner, that's when I did the passive style learning that I was still absorbing things,
Hmm.
but not in full mode like my exam.
Gotcha, gotcha. That makes sense. That really does. Okay, so that's that first period. We were very close to passing, didn't get by. Then you said on your second attempt before, well, it was right before the leave of absence, you said. Did you take a practice exam that you didn't pass?
Yeah,
Wait.
so let me see. So dedicated off. So during my dedicated time, I scored from 160. I did about a test every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Um, and so I went from 161 to 176, 168, 181, 168, all the way to 187.
Okay.
Um, look, took a leave of abs officially kind of took a leave of absence starting, it looks like July. And then this is where it really got upsetting. I got 185, 196, 190, 186, 196, 181. I needed
Okay.
to score
Ninety-four.
the 194. So
Yeah.
I think I did twice. Oh no, three times I scored 196. So
Wow.
I was so close. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what showed me that I was ready to take the exam because I had passed,
Sure.
but I still failed. And so that's why something that my school recommended and something I recommend to all the students that I work with is you need to score 10 points or an entire standard deviation above
Yeah.
passing because you don't know what's going to happen the day of the exam.
Exactly.
Whether if that is very complicated questions, whether if that is an anxiety attack, you don't know what's going to happen. So having that buffer zone is so important. And I did
Yeah.
not provide myself a buffer zone.
Mm.
And that's why that was one of the downfalls that led to my failing.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So when you took that year off, you're working and then you started taking time off again and you restudied for the exam. What did you do different that time versus this time? And did you repeat a lot of the material you already did, or was it different stuff? What did you do then?
Good question. So after I failed that time, I
Hmm.
changed up my strategy to do not tutor mode. Now I'm doing at a
Okay.
time questions.
Fair
Now
enough.
I'm doing at least 80 questions a day. So
Okay.
whether that was a 40 and then review them in the afternoon or 40 review lunch, 40 review
Okay.
dinner. So that was a huge help to allowing me to get into the studying mode.
Sure.
I also became more they were also mixed questions, so that was a big thing. I think another big thing that I changed is how I was reviewing the questions. Instead of just looking at the question I got wrong, I looked at the other answers and I changed up how I was taking the questions to
Hmm.
look at the other answers and figure out what part of this answer is wrong and why
Okay.
is it wrong? And so that has been huge to how I've been improving, how I've then been doing on step two and in step three. When I'm looking at answers, I'm not just looking for the right answer because sometimes there are two right answers. I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
looking at what little part is wrong, whether that's slightly wrong, that's automatically wrong. Or for this specific patient that they're talking about, it would be wrong. So looking at, so I'm focusing on testing strategy was a big
Okay.
part.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. So more testing strategy, and I'm assuming the content you learn basically from UWorld itself, right? From doing the
Always
questions.
UWorld. So that is
Okay.
the reason I say always UWorld is yes, there are some phenomenal other questions bank. There
Yeah.
are AMBOS, there are Boards and Beyond, and I did use them a little bit, but the biggest thing is UWorld is the one that closely mimics the NBME. And
Yeah.
so that's why I always recommend you focus on NBME first, and then if you have time, you can do the other ones. Or if you want to, if there's a specific topic you're really confused about after you've done the U World, you can then go to, let's talk about AMBOS and go into those specific topic questions, let's pulmonary function tests and do all the pulmonary function tests for
Okay.
AMBOS.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So you didn't watch the videos for like Boards Mirage, Pathoma.
I did.
You did what? You watched all of them?
I did. That was definitely part of my downfall because I'm spending too much,
Mm,
I call that passive learning, but I
yeah.
did through all of them throughout my leave of absence because now we're talking about I have a full year to study.
Yeah.
So I've seen every single sketchy, every
Every
single
single.
platform, every single boards and beyond, because I was trying to
Okay.
do as much as I can to
Sure.
pass.
Did you think that helped you in any way at all?
I really wish I could say yes, but the reality is no.
No.
It helped me feel emotionally better,
Mm.
but it did not help me answer the questions. It just helped me feel better that I knew the material.
So you're saying if someone's in a time that like a very short amount of time, 6 weeks, they haven't watched anything sketchy, haven't watched anything Pathoma, any of this stuff, you say go directly into UWorld, learn all of UWorld, and
A
go
hundred
and take the
percent.
tests.
100%, because then you can the top you're going to figure out through doing those questions what topic you actually know and what topics you actually don't know. And
Okay.
that's where that you can then I write them down, and in the later times where your brain is decompressing, then you can watch those sketchy ambos you rolled to use those to really have a better understanding of the concept.
Got it, got it. That's smart. I like that. Um, yeah, okay. I like that planning.
A
Hearing it
lot
from
of practice
someone,
and error. A lot of
yeah, yeah, no, you have a lot of experience, but also in that time crunch, because I sometimes myself gets asked by people in that time crunch, like, how do I study? And it's like, okay, so here's what we need to do, but it's hard to cover everything in that time crunch.
exactly. And I think the biggest thing also, step one is different than step two, is different than step three. And I feel like if through watching, let's say, one video,
Mhm.
uh, let's start with the easiest that I love bringing this up of Staff Aureus.
Yeah,
That one video of Staff Aureus will cover content that you'll need on step one, two, and three.
yeah,
And so if you spend all this time trying to memorize every single little picture on Staff Aureus, you might never see any of that stuff. You might see just one small little thing. And that's why it's important to do the U world for the specific step
yeah,
that you are in.
that's smart. I like that. Moving a little bit on. So you took your step one, you failed it, then you passed it again. Fast forward, you did well on step two, I presume, and then well in your clinicals, you probably learned a lot how to study. How did you do in residency or applying to residency? How was that process for you? Was it frowned upon for failing one attempt? Were you able to explain it that, hey, I had this situation, I came up from it? What was your story on that?
Such a good question. I feel like that is one of the most popular things that people ask me because it's hard. We go through medicine and failure is not talked about. It is
Mm,
not encouraged. And so anything, there's not a lot of people who talk about it. And so there's this fear that if you fail something as big as a step exam, it will negatively impact you when you
yeah.
apply to residency.
Mhm.
And I tried to share my story. I tried to share other people who have also failed and matched because it exists.
Mm,
Um, exactly like you said, it's all about how you tell your story. And so you tell that story through the personal statement, through the interviews. There are sections on the ERAS application where it specifically asks, did you have challenge with academics? Explain in 250 characters or something like that. So that is the opportunity to explain. I've had people who failed for many different reasons. And the thing is, program directors get it.
mhm,
They've been there. They've reviewed these applications. They care about, do you know the material to pass? Did you get a pass in the end?
mm.
Are you at a ability right now to start residency? And so whether you struggled on step one or step two, maybe that means you might have to do a little bit of extra research, or it means that you need to apply to more programs than the typical applicant. Maybe that means that you need to take step three. Very important if you're like an IMG,
Yeah.
or if you fail step two, maybe that step three is going to be that additional thing that really gets residency's attention, that they won't have to worry about you when you're a resident taking that extra time to take step three. So there are ways to get around it. It's not the end of the world, even though it does feel like it.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. I know a lot of people always wonder, and seeing someone like you matched in PGY1 right now, it's a lot of inspiration for a lot of people. Thank you.
Yes.
So a little bit of wrapping up. So we went over your whole step one journey, all the struggles, how you overcame it, and thank you for giving those details on those practice exam scores. That really helps too. And then talking about matching and all that. I wanted to kind of conclude with a little bit of off topic and a question that was kind of left from a previous guest. To
Mhm.
kind of to pick at your brain, see what you like to think about. I know you said you're into wellness, so this might play into your hands. The question for you that was left was, if you could change one health policy or one healthcare related thing in America, what would it be?
Mhm. We're talking about health policy of everyone else, not just medical students and residents.
Yes, America in general, what would you change? Healthcare policy or just healthcare related thing?
Hmm. Well, if we're talking about specifically about, let's say, residents, because that's obviously the space that I'm in right now, I think it's so important to not have residents be working these horrendous hours of 80-hour weeks, 80 plus hour weeks, spending over 24 hours at a time taking care of patients, because these are people's lives, both people we're taking care of and people that are actively being trying to be doctors. And thankfully, I am in a residency that we don't do that, but I see this in my husband. I see this in my friends who are working these horrible shifts, and I'm seeing how it's hurting their health. I'm seeing the suicides, the burnouts. Like, this is why we're having such a struggle in the healthcare community, is because we're not mentally and physically taking care of the people who are supposed to be taking care of others. So that is one of the biggest shifts that we need to make, is taking care of the health of the people that are becoming doctors and becoming future physicians.
Got it, got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. Do you have a question in mind that you would like to leave for someone else?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to ask is what what do they believe is the most hidden curriculum of medicine?
Hidden curriculum of medicine.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. What do you mean by hidden? Like,
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Yes, very good question. And so there are so many things in medicine where it's expected. There are hidden expectations where and medical students don't know until they make a mistake. So, for example, speaking out of term to a medical in third
Mm,
year rotation when it's the turn of a resident, or speaking or saying the right answer when an attending doesn't want the right answer. They want you to make the wrong answer so they can teach you.
interesting.
There
Okay.
are a lot of those little
Yeah.
hidden things that no one talks about. They're not written down everywhere, anywhere, but there's this expectation that you just know them.
Yeah. I see what you mean now. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, Dr. Moss, it was a pleasure to have you. It was a pleasure to learn from you all the struggles, how you overcame them. And I think this is going to be really, really helpful for people to watch this. And thank you for taking the time before, especially before your step three. I really appreciate it. I know how hard these exams are. And thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you so much. And if anyone wants to learn more about the things that I mentioned, whether if that's accommodations, failing step, how to learn how to take that step exam and turn it into an actual residency match, you can see my podcast, Life as a Patient Doctor, on all where you get your podcasts and also on YouTube.
Yes, and I'll have Dr. Moss send me her link, so it'll be below in the description. All right. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for watching.